What's going on, guys? It's your boy the Mana Shark here, and today we're going to be talking about playing Modern on a budget. So when surveying options on playing Modern, it's easy to see many decks that cost well over $800, some reaching $1,500, which is just way too expensive for most people. Luckily, there are a lot of entry points into the format that are considerably cheaper options that can still pack a punch and take down large competitive tournaments. Before we dive into the decks, I wanted to explain the criteria for why I chose these decks. I chose $500 as the cap, as that's about the average cost of most Tier 2 decks that can still compete in a Tier 1 metagame. There are certainly going to be some cheaper decks than the ones I picked out here, but I cannot in good conscience recommend buying into most of those brews while playing in larger tournaments like invitational qualifiers that have entry fees starting at $30. There are also ways to make these individual decks cheaper by cutting more expensive cards, such as some of the lands, with the intention of buying them later and using cheaper alternatives. Also, it's important to recognize the components of each deck. Unless you plan on buying entire other Modern decks down the road, or you never get bored of your decks, it's important to consider what other decks some of the expensive cards you're buying can go towards in the future. Finally, I think it's very important to consider the adaptability of decks. If the deck is in an unfavorable metagame, if it's your only deck, well, you're going to need some sideboard tech, otherwise you might not be able to play nearly as much. So without further ado, I give you 12 decks under $500 to start playing Modern with. So coming in at number 12, we have Martyr proc. Martyr proc is basically a mono-white control deck that's all about gaining ridiculous amounts of life with Martyr of Sands. You can keep recurring Martyr by forecasting Proclamation of Rebirth or using a Maria the Sky Rune. At some point you can start beating down with beefy Saracens or reach such a high life total and wear down your opponent's board so that no finite amount of damage your opponents are dealing is enough. What's really great about the deck is that it's well below budget, and the right metagame can really outgrind the control decks and make aggro decks lose their will to live. The cards it uses are fairly niche, but it seems to be like a lot of fun. Number 11, Soul Sisters. This deck often doesn't get its fair share of credit. Soul Sisters is named after Soul Tenant and Soul Warden, and is more of an aggressive build focused on gaining life and winning with cards like Archangel of Thune pumping all your tokens, or by beating down with a big Ajani's Pridemate. The deck is powerful and has some pretty strong finishes at medium-sized tournaments. Like Martyr proc, Soul Sisters uses some fairly niche cards that can't be used in most other Modern decks, but they do splash colors easy, making it a fairly adaptable deck. Coming in at number 10, we have Storm. Storm is a hard-to-master, but very budget deck that tries to play a ton of spells in one turn, and wins with a Grape Shot or Empty the Warrens. It does this by playing plenty of ritual effects, and then goes off with Past in Flames to generate a ton of mana and play its cantrips until you draw one of your win conditions. It even has Gifts Ungiven to set up the combo. This deck can sometimes be one of the best decks in Modern, but currently with all of the graveyard hate people are playing, it's suffering. Caleb Schurer is a Storm master, and before all of this dredge nonsense, he was top 8ing so many tournaments with this deck, with very few adaptations made to the list. It's especially awesome considering the deck doesn't even play any Scalding Tarns, so it comes in at around $300 to build. Investment-wise, the deck is a great place to start as a competitive deck, and down the road can be turned into different blue-red decks, such as Wizards, or Is It Phoenix, or Blue Moon. At number 9, we have AdNauseam. AdNauseam is a solid combo deck, all about going off with the namesake AdNauseam, with either Angel's Grace or Phyrexian Unlife to draw your entire deck. Then you close out the game with Lightning Storm, Cast It Off, Simian Spirit Guides for a massive amount of damage. You also have some alternative win conditions in the main deck and sideboard, such as Jace Wielder of Mysteries and Grave Titan. The deck is pretty strong, but not interactive until sideboarding, and there's no easy deck to pivot the cards you collect for it into. However, it is a strong combo deck that has been competitive since its inception, and while difficult to play, is a very strong contender. At number 8, we have Bogles. So Bogles is a deck all about enchanting Slippery Bogles and Gladecover Scouts with a ton of auras and swinging in. It can be hard to interact with, but unfortunately, this deck is very much a meta call. The deck is also not very adaptable to the meta, in that most lists look the same with the exception of a few flex slots in the main and a little bit of a difference in the sideboard. On the plus side, when the deck works, it's extremely powerful. Coming in at number 7, we have Merfolk, a fan favorite tribal deck focused on putting lords on the table. Merfolk has had its fair share of play, in the top tables. Even though its game plan is to be proactive, it has access to a lot of interaction even in the main board. A huge plus is that there are so many strong Merfolk that you can actually have a good amount of adaptations that you can make to your deck in the creature base, such as playing Harbinger of Tides, Mistcaller, or Curse Catcher. It's very easy to exceed the budget, but you can still play a fairly competitive version with just playing basic islands until you have the money to upgrade into some of the non-basic lands. Number 6, we have Blue-White Spirits. One of the best decks a year ago, Spirits is a very strong tribal deck, sporting some very strong interaction. While developing a board of highly interactive creatures like Spellqueller and Remorseful Cleric, you have cards like Dragskull Captain and Supreme Phantom to pump them up into large flying beaters. You can even use some of the cheaper lands for the mana base and upgrade from there, which is something a lot easier to do in 2-color decks. While the Spirit Matters cards are niche, there are plenty of great staples in here, including Aether Vial, which opens the opportunity into pivoting into so many different creature decks like Merfolk. Depending on the metagame, this build can also look at splashing green for Collected Company. At number 5, we have Elves. I've been playing Modern Elves for quite a few years now, and the deck is a lot of fun. The goal of the deck is to use Heritage Druid and Llanowar Elves to vomit your hand onto the battlefield, then use Azuri's ability or play a Shaman of the Pack to deal a lot of damage. In the longer games, it has Collected Company and Lead the Stampede to rebuild the board after a board wipe, or to amass a larger army. My biggest issue with the deck is that it's too narrow in its game plan and is too susceptible to removal spells. Also, many of the cards are too niche to pivot into a new build, other than switching between black-green and white-green elves. That being said, there are a lot of big tournament finishes with this deck, including most recently a top 8 at GP Portland. Funny enough, it's actually kind of rare to see black-green elves list place well with all the lands that it can use, as Cavern of Souls is still over $60 a pop. So while the optimal list can come in at around $700, we've had so many lists top 8 major tournaments playing lands like Unclaimed Territory, and even the occasional mono-green list with mostly just forests. Coming in at number 4, we have Orzhov Eldrazi, sometimes referred to as Eldrazi in taxes. It's another Aether Vial deck, this time with everyone's favorite bad guy tribe. The deck has a lot of interaction, great beaters, a good long game, and it's really fun to play. What makes the deck so strong is its ability to abuse cards like Flicker Wisp and Eldrazi Displacer to make some really interesting plays like saving a creature from dying or constantly blinking a Wasteland Strangler to wipe your opponent's board. It also has access to some of the best sideboard cards in Modern, such as Rest in Peace and Stony Silence, while packing some hate in the main board with cards like Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. What's really amazing is that there are so many other Eldrazi builds, so once you invest in the Eldrazi package of Thought-Knot Seer, Reality Smasher, and Eldrazi Temple, you can move towards a build like Red-Green Eldrazi. Also, almost all the supporting cards like Thoughtseize, Inquisition, and Path see play in plenty of other decks. Coming in at number 3, we have Titan Shift, or Valakut decks. So Primeval Titan Valakut decks can adapt to the metagame surprisingly well, with so many different options. These decks are all about playing Valakut the Molten Pinnacle and amassing a lot of mountains with Scapeshift, and sometimes using Primeval Titan to get there, or just to beat down. While you can get the more typical ramp into Scapeshift and deal 18 to 21 damage to your opponent, the deck also has the ability to take things slow and play like a control deck in a sense. What's really great about buying into this deck is that a huge chunk of your money is going towards prime real estate, being Wooded Foothills and single copies of Windswept Heath and Bloodstained Mire, which down the road can be traded a lot easier or used in a lot of other decks. Also, there are many different builds of this kind of deck, like you can play Through the Breach and add some copies of Emrakul Aeon's Torn, you could play the Platinum Empyrean Madcap Experiment combo, or add Bring to Light and some other blue cards to make a spicy brew. Coming in at number 2, we have Mono Red Phoenix. A take on the very popular Is It Phoenix build, Mono Red sacrifices some of the card selection and interaction for more speed. The deck is all about getting into the red zone with prowess creatures and casting 3 spells in one turn to trigger your Arclight Phoenixes to come back to the battlefield. This build has placed well at plenty of large tournaments, as sometimes if you're just fast and resilient, you can crush the tournament. If you buy into it, down the road you can even upgrade it into the Is It Phoenix build, which wouldn't even necessarily be an upgrade. Coming in at number 1, we have Burn. If you like all of your cards to say deal 3 damage, or if you like finishing your rounds early so that you can buy Chinese food, this is the deck for you. Like Bogles, the deck is fairly simple, and it either works or it doesn't. There are a few decisions to be made, but for the most part, it's just bolt your face and swing in. What makes Eidolon especially disgusting in Modern is that most of the spells that people are playing cost 3 mana or less. so either he gets removed or deals 8+ damage. There are so many lists that do well, that play green as a splash color for Cindervines, but if you want to be even more budget, you can hold off on working with the green splash and still do pretty well. It's not my cup of tea, but hey, the deck works, and has been favorable in many of Modern's metagames as a linear strategy that is super consistent. As always, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out the links to some of the more average deck lists for each archetype in the description. Definitely sleeve up a proxied version of a deck to try it out before investing so much money into the deck. Also, you want to make sure you like the deck. If you don't like the deck, you're not going to play Modern, so be sure that if you're buying into Modern, buy a deck you like. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like, subscribe, and maybe even ring the bell as it really helps me out. Are there any decks that I talked about that interest you? Do you have any Modern favorites under $500 that I didn't mention? Let me know in the comment section below. This is the Mana Shark, out.